I have a question for you. When we go to the polls and make our voices heard, are our elected officials there to serve as our representatives or as our rulers? In November 2023, nearly 60% of Ohio voters passed Issue 2, legalizing the adult use and possession of recreational cannabis. It was a clear, unambiguous mandate from the people. Yet almost immediately, the Ohio General Assembly went to work dismantling it. Lawmakers recently used a piece of legislation, Senate Bill 56, to blatantly gut key provisions of that measure. But the story of cannabis in Ohio isn't just about marijuana. It's a glaring case study in the systematic erosion of the citizen initiative process. It's about dark money, special interests, and the quiet transformation of representative government into an increasingly concentrated oligarchy. A system where power is held by a small group of wealthy donors and corporate insiders who dictate policy behind closed doors rather than the voters who actually cast the ballots. And it forces us to confront a fundamental truth that lawmakers deliberately ignore. We can protect public safety, including the safety of our children, without surrendering our freedoms or our voice at the ballot box. Let's look at how they did it. To understand how the legislature justified gutting Issue 2, we have to look at the pretext they used, the 2018 Farm Bill. By defining hemp as cannabis containing less than 0.3% Delta-9 THC, when President Trump signed the 2018 Farm Bill into law, Congress inadvertently created a massive loophole. This loophole birthed a multi-billion-dollar gray market of intoxicating, synthetically derived cannabis products sold in gas stations and convenience stores without sufficient oversight or safety testing. The public health consequences have been real. The CDC reported a significant increase in cannabis-involved emergency room visits, resulting in terrifying panic attacks and episodes of severe cyclical vomiting caused by accidental ingestion of massive doses of highly concentrated THC products. Recent analysis by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, or NORM, confirmed many unregulated hemp products exceed federal THC limits and contain mold, pesticides, or chemical solvents. In response, NORM strongly urged the FDA to create regulatory guidelines and advocated for common-sense self-regulation by the hemp-derived THC industry, including age restrictions and strict labeling requirements. But instead of simply regulating hemp, the Ohio Legislature used these valid public health concerns as a Trojan horse to fundamentally alter the core provisions of Issue 2. To understand how this sabotage was legally permissible, you have to understand Ohio laws. Ohio citizens can directly pass laws in two ways, as a constitutional amendment or as an initiated statute. The wording adopted in a constitutional amendment is permanent and cannot be altered by lawmakers. But an initiated statute is treated just like any other law. Once passed by voters, the legislature retains the power to immediately amend or even repeal it. Because Issue 2 was passed as a voter referendum rather than a constitutional amendment, the Ohio General Assembly retained the power to override the will of the voters, and they wasted no time doing just that. Here is how Senate Bill 56 dismantled the initiative. First, home grow. Issue 2 allowed adults to cultivate up to 12 plants per household. Senate Bill 56 slashed that in half, limiting it to 6. Next, THC caps. The legislature reduced the maximum allowable THC potency in extracts from the voter-approved 90% down to 70%. Third, and perhaps most egregiously, they hijacked the tax revenue. Issue 2 originally allocated 36% of tax revenue to a Social Equity and Jobs Fund, a program explicitly designed to provide financial assistance, loans, and business grants to communities that had been disproportionately harmed by decades of marijuana criminalization. SB 56 entirely eliminated this social equity program, redirecting 64% of the funds to the state's General Revenue Fund, essentially a slush fund for politicians. And finally,
They created new criminal charges for minor possession and use violations, recriminalizing the very people the voters sought to protect. Why would the legislature work so hard to overturn the will of their own constituents? To find out, we just need to follow the money. During the Issue 2 campaign, a coalition heavily funded by corporate lobbyists opposed the measure. Nationally, dark money groups like Smart Approaches to Marijuana, or SAM, have poured millions into rolling back legalization efforts. But the industries with the most to lose are well known: Big Pharma, private prisons, and most notably, the alcohol industry. Research shows a clear economic substitution effect. When recreational cannabis is legalized, alcohol sales drop by up to 15%. In a U.S. alcohol market that generates roughly $300 billion annually, a 15% loss represents a staggering $45 billion threat to their bottom line. Consumers are increasingly recognizing cannabis, particularly THC-infused beverages, as a safer alternative, and science backs them up. Peer-reviewed research consistently links alcohol abuse to increased rates of domestic violence, sexual assault, and suicide. In 2023 alone, alcohol-impaired driving accounted for over 12,000 traffic fatalities in the U.S. The World Health Organization identified a direct causal link between alcohol and cancer in humans, placing alcohol in the same class as asbestos and tobacco. Given this reality, it is no surprise that alcohol industry lobbyists have fought aggressively to restrict cannabis access to protect their market share. This sabotage isn't just happening in Ohio, it's part of a nationwide effort to block meaningful cannabis reform. Despite President Biden's efforts to reclassify marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, a move that would create a pathway for safe, FDA-regulated cannabis medications, the DEA has colluded with anti-reform groups to stack the deck and delay that process. When the House repeatedly passed the MORE Act, aiming to federally decriminalize cannabis, it was stalled in the Senate, stymied by the outsized influence of lobbyists representing the alcohol, pharmaceutical, and private prison industries. This callous official federal obstruction has caused immeasurable harm to patients who need those medications. For cannabis patients, it's a familiar, cruel charade where the DEA yanks away the promise of relief at the last possible moment, leaving them falling flat once again. But in Ohio, the legislature's disregard for the voters is a symptom of a much deeper rot, a systemic prioritization of corporate donors over the health and safety of constituents. While chemical industry lobbyists stall regulation, PFAS, forever chemicals, continue to contaminate Ohio's drinking water, despite CDC evidence linking them to cancer, liver damage, and profound developmental harm to children. And in early 2026, the Ohio EPA even proposed lowering water quality standards to allow massive tech data centers to discharge heated, chemically treated wastewater directly into Ohio rivers and Lake Erie. Ohio's fresh water supply, particularly Lake Erie, which provides drinking water to 3 million Ohioans and supports a $20 billion tourism and recreation economy, is one of the state's most valuable natural resources. Yet the EPA explicitly admitted these discharges would harm water quality and trigger toxic algae blooms, justifying the threat to this precious natural asset simply to keep pace with economic development. Mind you, this is the same General Assembly responsible for a $60 million bribery scandal that sent former Ohio House Speaker Larry Householder to prison for 20 years. The same legislature that ignored the state Supreme Court to force unconstitutional gerrymandered electoral maps on the public. The same government that held an unprecedented, legally dubious special election in August 2023 to try to change Ohio's constitutional amendment process, specifically to strip voters of their ballot initiative power. The gutting of Issue 2 is not just about marijuana, it is about whether Ohio citizens actually govern ourselves. The legislature used the legitimate need to close the dangerous hemp loophole as a smokescreen. Then, behind closed doors, they protected the alcohol industry from a safer competitor, hijacked tax revenues meant for social equity, and ignored the mandate of nearly 60% of the electorate. When lawmakers set the precedent that they can flagrantly dismantle such a clear voter mandate, they establish a blueprint they can apply to anything. The mechanism of sabotage remains intact. If a 60% majority on a high-profile issue can be so easily discarded, no citizen initiative is truly safe. We can protect public safety, including the safety of our children, without surrendering our freedoms or our voice at the ballot box. Ohioans must recognize this broader threat to our democratic process and reclaim our voice. We must remind those in power that they were elected to represent the will of the people, not to rule over us as unaccountable monarchs serving the interests of a powerful, privileged few. Your voice matters. Find your Ohio House representative at ohiohouse.gov/members. Find your Ohio State Senator at